How are you guys doing? Are you done with the class? With your final papers? I cannot unmute you.
Well, sorry about that. I took my video. I think most people submitted their final papers and their self-reflections. Some people needed extensions though. But yeah, for the most part, the class is done. So it's nice to be able to focus on other things now.
Do you, Eddie, have to return also a paper in addition to all the work you did in coordinating?
No. We had a collective feedback session, and I just joined some of the groups there. But I'm sure I'll check in with Kris and the rest of the team soon. But that's a good idea, actually.
Well, I mean, part of the purpose of this, so this is the first of our meetings. Elena's there, great. So there is no, let's see that I've got everything on. Yeah, we don't have a recipe for this. This is the first, we're making this up. But the basic idea is, from my point of view, is for me to learn from you. So I'm in this for what I can learn from it. And there's been this one constant thing. It's like learners, the whole issue of learners' voices, and the extent to me, the idea of we're seeing it at all levels of the age thing, right? So we have learners' voices in this recent thing in Auntie's work, but very much in the play worlds, which we didn't talk about in the class, really, right? Eddie and Elena, do you guys know about the play world literature at all? Okay, well, it's we don't have to get deeply into it, but it's one of the uses of play with little kids, but in a very unusual way where the adults are dressed up as characters when they come into the classroom. And a teacher will, or a teacher's aide will just make this fantasy character, this person in costume, a part of the classroom. And then use that and begin to use that to create what they call these play episodes that are often around a book or around a folk tale or something like that. And everybody gets into it. Well, pretty much everybody gets into it. And it raises a lot of issues about learning how to make these moments happen that adults can learn by being with the children, and then the adults having learned to see the children that way, sort of way of seeing the children, recognizes the bids for play, and then can spontaneously use that themselves in order to create a better learning, well, for them, a better relationship with the kid for teaching learning. That's how, is that how you understand it, Auntie, or would you say that differently than I did?
I think you said it very well, yeah.
It's extremely interesting, and it raises all the questions of intervention research. So if you put it just as a black box and you said, okay, we have this thing called play worlds, and now we're going to try to introduce that in teacher training. So it works for a lot for the people in teacher training, you know, people are going to work training other teachers, because it seems that the teachers, when they've been able to participate in this kind of, it's how I understand it, if they can participate in this kind of thing, their way of seeing the children is usable elsewhere. So they can take other scenes that aren't like that and introduce pieces of that into the scene. So it started a really interesting discussion, but it got me thinking that here are people arguing for preschoolers, listening hard to what preschoolers are saying and the way in which they're saying it. So you can pick up on the originality and the play element, which carries with it emotion all the time. So you can bring emotion into it without, and then the question is, where can you do this? And how do you know it's happened? So it was a really good discussion, but that was the little ones. And here in the class, the whole thing was about bringing everybody's voices into it, insofar as you could. Beginners who are out here, people who are from there, and then getting them to listen to each other. And it struck me as that, yeah, that whole thing is really a utopian, kind of there's a utopian standard. The Russians use this word etalon, which means it's the thing that you're trying to match yourself against. Like my son learned how to slide into second base in baseball when he was 6 years old by playing a little bit himself, but watching the second baseman from the Yankees or something, whatever he did, and then sliding across the floor over and over and over again, practicing it because he had this standard that he was using to try to get the motion right. So, you know, I thought that was interesting, but then it relates to the class. In any event, that's where we just started the conversation. But Eddie, if you were, and just before you arrived, Dylan, I think Eddie had just come to the realization that maybe he should be writing a paper, something, you know, from what's just been going on. But the question here is how to help what you guys are doing. What are your projects, and what questions did you come away with in the class? Like, what was that about? And then we can try to, if you don't understand it, then, you know, there's other stuff that I don't understand with what was going on. And we just trade and try and learn from it. You know, so either, you know, but I don't know who's youngest among the two of you, but I'm not going to guess. I'm just going to say ladies first and do that sexist move and make a decision that way.
Hello, everyone.
Hi there.
It's really nice to be here. I guess, so I was planning to kind of prepare for today's meeting. I got a little bit sick during the weekend, so I was unable to do that. Nevertheless, I guess that something that I haven't grasped very well are the foundations of chat. And I don't know if you saw in my comments on the documents, I had a lot of questions about the core definitions of, okay, so what is an object, and how do you understand it, if we can have different examples of what it is and what it isn't. I don't know if that is possible.
Sure.
So I'm just thinking about the things that I have in mind. And also something else that I had a question is about the foundations of chat. And I remember that Eddie recommended a piece, one of your pieces, Mike, that I read. But I was thinking of, and I don't know how to explain it, like maybe at a more fundamental level. I think like humanism might be one of the things that is like underlying.
I see, yeah. You mean in terms of broad intellectual traditions?
Yeah. I think that piece in the part of the history was missing a little bit for me, besides trying to understand the core concepts of chat.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think there, and here I'm going to defer a little bit to Eddie because I'm not quite sure of where the project stands, but if there was a project that we began before the chat, right at the very beginning of the idea of the Spencer project, where we created, or we took, oh boy, Sandra, Eddie, why don't you message Sandra and ask her if she'd come in, because she knows where this stands, or maybe you know, where we were doing the sort of family tree, and we started that one that Andy Blunden had done. Okay, I think that there's a workman in the house. Just excuse me. My wife doesn't move rapidly. Okay, they're in touch. But it's a tree, and one of the things that we got into, which, so I think it'd be useful to find the family tree first of all. And I don't know, I can't sit here and talk with you and look for it at the same time. And Eddie, I'm thinking that if we're going to have these, or Ivana, somehow, we ought to have a little place we could place a depository for some of these sort of useful diagrams or something that seem to help. I have one in reserve for today if people didn't have anything else. The one where Kris did a double helix and showed it was sort of contrasting standard views and an activist social design experiment view. And I thought that would be very useful also. These prompts that can help you stay on the topic. So I think that would be very useful. And it started a very important discussion, which has to do with the overall project of trying to recover in sort of publicly the historical roots of chat in terms of its not only its activist stance, but its constant approach toward the sort of utopian view of, at the extreme of something like the golden rule in one way, right? Or the formula of from each according to their need, or from their ability to each according to their need, from each according to their ability. This idea of a sort of egalitarian pro-social environment, and the notion that you could make that exist everywhere. And that's what that's the sort of millenarian dream. So there's a Christian version there are versions of that in all the religions, and that's the question. Is it a theory? Is it a scientific theory? Is it scientific socialism that Marx was doing? And is that a science of history? Or is it also, does it have its faith aspects of projecting these things, a better way to do things? And that's very much a part of the origins of chat from a number of different views. So it's both a Christian point of view, it's a Western Christian and an Eastern Christian point of view from a different point of view. It's shared with Jewish point of view and a historical Jewish tradition. They come together in Eastern Europe. So you have a kind of radical socialist Jewish Eastern European population. It's in the Soviet Union and elsewhere. And you have these in the US as well, intentional communities. So, the Amana group, or Summerhill was another group, or the Mormon Church, which was like a whole other outspring in the United States of evangelical fundamentalism in an American pragmatic context of some sort. So, so I think the origins you can find there, and it's often people who are called progressives, right, are what is progress? And the progress from a progressive point of view is toward equality, toward an authentic way of people evaluating each other and living together, right? And that means watching out for each other. You can see it big time in the public responses to the COVID thing, right? Community everything else is shattered, and all of a sudden little inventions and communities are like going like this, and we'll see. I mean, I saw a headline that there's no question there's been a revolution. The only question is what now, right? So I mean, we can I view it, I don't want to hawk my own book here, although because I can just give it to you. But the first chapter of cultural psychology provides a pretty good view of my idea of the history. I know a lot more now than I did 30 years ago, and everything, but the basic story for me works. And it's just the half of it that I couldn't do was the half that had to do with deliberately caused inequalities of the sort that we have in the United States, and the struggle to deal with them. I could promote that kind of work and work on it myself, but I couldn't summarize it in the same way I could summarize it if I sort of stuck to the very general principles and the idea of cross-cultural work and so on that are in there. But I think that's part of what Regen has been able to do. So there's that original, or a couple of sort of original things. When we bring this into the Regen arena, it's seen as white. And it is. So if it's white, it's probably colonial settler. It has those historical, ideological splits that are still, all of that. I'm not sure, maybe that's long enough for me to talk and somebody else ask a question or explain what, or you say, Elena, whether or not, where you go with it next. I don't know. But there is definitely a Northern European long-term and quite widespread worldview that's associated with progressivism, Marxism, social justice, equality, and so on. And that's the origins. Yeah, and that's but the project was because we thought the whole thing was being domesticated, that its larger social point and its political implications weren't being considered as a part of the project, and that it really needed an infusion of critical voices and critical energy. Well, we thought that the critical folks could probably benefit from learning more about the foundations of what they were interacting with and saying that they were using. It's very standard to have critical learning sciences papers that say they're using chat as a methodology.
I really appreciate it. I think one of the things that I've been thinking about, especially because of the project that I am working on right now, which is with Native American peoples.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that initially was very appealing to me was the humanism that I kind of saw embedded in chat and in readings like from Kris, where some of these things are being made explicit. But for this particular population, I don't know if, and given the world situation, if maybe challenging that humanism, like that human centrism, might be helpful, besides the things that you already mentioned, Mike. That is something that I have in mind. But yeah, it was helpful what you were sharing. And if there's some kind of map or tree, that would be definitely a good artifact to look at.
As they say, if I turn and I start looking for it, it's like,
I can look for it too, Mike. I'm pretty sure Sandra has it.
I found it right away. I have the earliest one is from Arna Reitel. And here's just a very quick thing. I think, share my screen. And see what happens if I share this. Now, can I make this bigger? I don't know. This is the shared screen version of it, I guess. So where's the desktop? Hold on here. This is too small. I guess this is too small to see.
There's a magnifying
Yeah, up here in the upper corner here. Yeah. All right. Well, it's not all that clear, but start at the top, and the top starts with Descartes, and then off onto the right-hand side, it has Spinoza and Locke. Here it comes down to Hegel, and it goes from Hegel to Marx, and from Marx to Habermas all the way down here, down to Winograd and Flores, and it shows that there are two other ones, one of them called legitimation, I think, is probably views. And the other is something or other. Tatsky, activity theories. And then here's Winograd and Flores, right in the middle. So, and it brings these down, and then I guess Andy Blunden had a different version of this. And then people from learning sciences who interacted with this said, but wait a second, where's Frantz Fanon? Where's Paulo Freire in here? Right? And so this is a tree. This is a particular tree that represents a particular historical development. But there are other ones, and what I see now is that there's a kind of, these things are somehow converging, that it's like you had them slightly out of focus, and that there's a sort of common thing that people are, and part of it is the humanism. And the humanism is in, for example, paying serious attention to 3-year-olds. It's like, how many people in the world, and everybody does at times, but how many of them stop and enter into a child's play just on the spur of the moment, right? It's hard. It usually gets you in trouble. But you see that as a common thing, because the same thing of, that's what I was saying, listening to the junior people, it means going against authority in general. I mean, that's what it means, right? So it's anti-authoritarian or authority in a way. Yeah.
Can I add to that? Elena, you were asking about some sort of map. Just yesterday, there was an incredible special issue published. Did you notice that? It was by Shirin Vusugi and Ray McDermott. It is in the journal. Oh, let me see.
I downloaded that set. I think I didn't do the whole journal, but I downloaded several of them.
Yeah, I have now the. I can put to the chat the. Why I don't get it
Thank
open.
you.
It's about culture of poverty, and what's I can explain when I was looking to open it. It's about the history of the idea of culture of poverty, the idea of blaming the poor people for their own condition, and how this idea has been challenged in chat. There was a paper on Mike's work by Louis Moll, but also others, and kind of delineating some historical eras and how these ideas have been discussed in the history involving that within chat. It's not exactly the same as humanism, but I think part of the humanism is kind of the benevolent idea of let's help the poor people without acknowledging our own complicity in actually making their condition worse.
Right.
Through the effort of doing science that's kind of intentionally trying to help the poor people, is it in itself making it harder,
Right.
and kind of making it like treating them as poor and not as humans. And I think that's kind of part of the humanism. It's kind of a relationship between global north and global south within countries like the United States, but also globally. And in post-colonial scholarship, there is a lot of discussion. I mean, you can't do global education research without dealing with this issue any longer. But I think it's been part of the chat, and I've been very interested for the past year or so. I tried to finalize a paper finally about that, the relationship between chat concepts and the post-colonialism in a way. It's kind of entangled, but I think there is also a tension there. So
Right.
maybe more should be written about that.
I'll make one more remark. We don't want to hijack this conversation, so we ought to let each of the other people start one. But I don't think we shouldn't lose this topic, because, right, so the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and when you see somebody a lot poorer than yourself and you're interacting with them, you want to help. At least if you're, I want to help them, right? But you have to realize that the help may be, you're doing a very little bit of help, and it's actually pacification in some way. And that then the hierarchy is set up so that if you get educated because of the history of formal education and who has controlled it, you're acquiring whiteness. It's like you're being blanched out with whiteness because of the history of the institution. So a person like myself cannot avoid modeling whiteness. It just isn't possible. Unless I can get into conversations that allow me to display for you other features of how I go about doing things. So I think it's that critical edge and of self-conscious edge is also important to hold on to here, and it's not easy. Let's see. Well, yeah, Eddie, you just disappeared from my screen for a second. What would you like to ask, or what would be a topic you'd like us to try to cover here?
Yeah, one thing that I wish we would have gone deeper into during the class is, I think what you all were talking about earlier, actually, just talking more about play. I have like the general definition of play as like how folks can participate at a head taller and it's a leading activity. But I would like to know more about how conceptions of play or cultural historical conceptions of play get expanded or constrained by digital technologies and digital gaming, specifically digital gaming technologies. And then within that, like more conversations around the politics of play or how we design for play and towards what ends. Because through my own research around video game play, there's a lot of narratives and ideologies that children engage with in these play worlds. And so what are the implications of these play worlds? How are children and adults or everyone that plays, what kind of agency do we see in these contexts? So yeah, those are just some questions that I had. And I do wish we could go deeper into play and technology.
Okay. So, I mean, that's another, right. So, I mean, that's something I've thought about for really a long time, and something that everybody now has to be engaged in. And I've sort of been, so going deeper into play. First of all, one of the people who knows more about play, because he knows more about everything than a lot of people, is Jay Lemke. And he's now in that utopian methodology group. And he can be overpowering in the sense that he tends to produce long texts, but you can rope him in and say, I didn't understand this part of the text. So I would, Jay is very smart about these kinds of things. So that's a good place to find out about it. And then Beth, there's this play world group. And I think you're interested in what you're trying to do is to create play worlds where play and other activities are baked in, suffuse the activities. Like everything is a little bit playful, right? And you just start from that, everything's going to be a little bit playful here, so that loosens things up for people, right? But now, like when I was doing technology and play and activity, the internet was like, we were innovating the internet, and we introduced it into the play as a kind of thing from the future, but also looking ahead for the kids, because we could see this was coming down on everybody, right? But then that allowed us to put this ambiguous play figure of a wizard out of sight. The wizard lives somewhere up in that net, and then they have to bring the wizard alive. Who would believe that? I mean, so then you have to make the wizard be a part of the activity, and so on. So, and then if you look at the LCHC starting with computers chapter on the autobiography, has Jim Levin's work. They like to use the idea of you have to have the whole task there, meaning the goals, and it has to be the kids' goals. So it fits in with interest-driven, right? So there's some sort of overlap between interest-driven and playful environments. And then you have the form of mediation. So just this morning, we were doing something where I had listened to a previous discussion, and then Jay wrote down a bunch of things he noticed from it because he hadn't been there. But I hadn't been there either, except at the beginning where I talked too long. And then people went on after that, and I learned a lot. But then just watching it, and then I had written some comments, but Jay did this like, left out some I would have, but, and then in writing, I comment, like it helped me solidify some things. Jay's the two together, and then with that, and Jay, the structure of Jay's things, I could put try to rephrase or add to in at each sort of next point. And there we had the live thing of people talking with each other over time and what you can get out of that. And then they try to remember some things and then they go off to read them. But do they come back and talk about them? Well, maybe, maybe not. But here you could sort of create this kind of discussion where it's sort of ongoing. So I think there are real potentials, and you have to try to realize them. So where right now, if you other folks don't know, Eddie and his group have this thing called the Prolepsis Design Studio that started a few years ago, where there are people from the Regen and critical learning sciences groups are involved in how do you design activities at a distance that retain a level playing field for just even for grown-ups, because there's a center and a periphery and this person gets to talk more, and often Zoom just recreates hierarchy. So how do you beat down the recreation of the hierarchy ahead of time? And so a lot of the modifications in the class were PDS learning having principles, seeing them not happen if they started out the wrong way, then revising and getting everybody's local voices in front. I keep telling people, it's for me a big exciting finding from the class was that we started off with the idea of having learners' voices in there with a couple of good activities, but they were at the end. And then both Kris and I started to get really nervous. And I don't know, we had PDS people say, wait a second, we don't, because the old people talked too long at first. And then Kris jammed it forward. And then by the time Uriah got there, it was before Uriah got to speak. He got to participate in the thing so that when he spoke, he'd have a chance coming in from the outside to understand humanism. This is humanism in action or something. He could understand the spirit of what was going on by the form of discourse that he could see. Because otherwise, it's a really strange world. It's a really strange world. So I think it's a big topic. Play is a big topic. And then computer-mediated interaction and play is a big topic, of which various kinds of game worlds is what I'd call tertiary artifacts, right? These things that are sort of play-like, but they also have a serious side to them, right? They're tertiary. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then we need to stop and, that is that they're a place where the rules of reality have been bent in order to accomplish something, where play is involved. And I think of play worlds, I think of your glitching activities, I think of all of these things, as tertiary artifacts, that they fit the definition of it. But that's when you're looking within it about how is it organized, like how do you do a play world, or how do you do caring curriculum, or whatever. But then there's this kind of other view of the thing, right, where it's actually a primary artifact. If you go up to the level of the system, I'm using, in my case, the fifth dimension as a primary artifact to see if I can get two institutions that my theory says ought to be cooperating to make a good developmental path, right? Then I want to see if I can't make that happen, right? But where's the critical edge? So then it becomes the content of the thing is a value system in itself. It's a little utopia. It's the way, if only we could have it like that. But if you had to think up a new way of doing things in order to have it like that, then you're going to deviate. And if you think that form of interaction is a model for how people should be in general, caring and supportive, and right, then you're going to try and make it live everywhere you can. You want it to go viral. I've been thinking about that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make these activities be like little meme systems that go viral, and people start to use them to organize their activity. Right? It's a different kind of going viral, but it's a cultural historical form of generation change, of changing. So I think that's hot, but then how do you guys have to organize it. So you have to pull together some papers. You got to get you got an international faculty now. If you can pull it, hold on to it and pull it, keep it going, right? So that you could have these as like theme areas or rooms with good materials in them that people can use for this topic. How do we bring together play and gaming? And then like, I think I asked you about this before, Eddie, but there's this guy named Tom Malone who back in cognitive science around 1982 or 83 did this really interesting study on what makes games addictive. There's been a number of those, but he has one of the early ones, and it's very simple set of properties gotten from the early Apple II and Xbox, maybe not even that long, but sort of crude, and it was very useful. Right, so I'm thinking if you had a depository of these things for people who are interested in it, and it was a little bit curated, students who don't have access very much, which is one of your things, right? You're trying to increase access. So students who don't have access would have access even if they didn't have the money, sort of for free. And then blend it with the educational process so that it's a little surplus value that comes out of doing the thing. So we're spending an hour or so together here, and then how does this create surplus value? That's a question. And we'll come back to that before we finish. So is that a good launching pad for follow-up for you, Eddie?
Yeah, that's a good follow-up. I think I would really like to get in contact with the play group. You said,
yeah, do it. It's easy. It's one of the affinity groups. So you just write and say, hey. And Auntie, it's also in a number of them are in the utopian methodology group, which I also recommend to you because what you're doing is a form of utopianism. You're trying to create ideal environments for a certain population of kids who've been stomped on historically.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So and that's a utopian goal because it's a utopian goal. We wouldn't be sitting here complaining about it. Right.
Eddie, do you have the contact details of the play group?
I have
Or do you
Beth's
want
contact
to-
info, but I don't know who else is in it. Maybe I should. I don't know
Yeah.
if I should email
think-
her.
Eddie, I
Yeah,
can
you could.
send an email and introduce you to the play group.
Well, Ivana, why don't you, I don't know if you did this recently, but just send around a mail that has a list of all the play groups and who to contact. Doesn't that exist? Or am I wrong?
Well, originally we thought that the emails of people who are interested will get to the organizers group first.
Okay, yeah.
That was
Okay.
that was the plan. So
Okay, well, then it just did. So it got to the organizing group because here you are.
yeah, and I just forwarded.
Okay, good. All right, so let's see. Anna, it's your turn here.
Sure. So, yeah, so I had a couple of maybe two connected questions, but one was around, I remember when Dr. Engstrom participated in the, I think it was one of the final classes,
Mhm.
that in his paper, there was this notion of a Finnish genealogy of chat, or lineage is the word that they used for that. So that started to make me think in relation to all these conversations about race and racialization, just started to make me think and wonder whether there are sort of, as we think about, that notion of not only what the worlds that we imagine should be, right, and how we think about equality or equity or justice, but also what it takes to get there, and how that could be also dependent very much on local histories.
Oh yeah.
So I was just wondering about that, how could we think about, I'm from Panama, for example, and there's US intervention, obviously layers of colonialism there, but also indigenous populations with now what is the national government and those relationships. So that's land use, things like that. So I wonder how much of when we think about chat and methodologies, using chat as a methodology, how much of that sort of like notion of lineage also comes when bringing in the critical piece with understandings of other like theoretical frameworks and how to connect them that can help us understand those more local issues. That's one part of it. And then the other one, that's just super quick, but I was wondering about when working on interventions or like the reorganization of activity systems, something that really caught my attention in the, I think it was the Utopian Methodologies class, was on the notion of imagination. I was thinking about imagination and like even as an artifact, if you will. So I was wondering, like, working with in this process with other humans, like to design a different activity system that is going to be implemented, like how does imagination play a role there in what people know as possible or not, in either constraining or, you know, and how can you know, work with that as a reality, or maybe bring more like mediational tools, like videos about, like, for example, like if I were to work in Panama with like a school there in design and after school program, would I have to bring like videos of like the Fifth Dimensions programs, or like teachers there could get a sense of like, you know, and start to like expand sort of like imagination in a way, or like, does that make sense? So I'm thinking about like, how can we think of imagination as something that it could be either constraining or expansive. So
okay, so two things. One is the centrality of imagination to this discussion, right? But the other one, it strikes me that I hadn't thought about this before, but maybe it's worth thinking about that and it has to do with the genealogy that Elena was talking about, that there's a convergence between a kind of value system of valuing the other and having empathy and caring for the other, and the methodology that you need in order to do the intervention. They converge, because in order to be able to do the intervention, you really have to understand the other person's point of view and how they came to it, because their point of view is historically accumulated, right? And they come into it as their culture, is their history. I always call culture history in the present, right? That's what all the stuff around you, but also all the things that people are telling you. That's what the culture is. It's all the stuff that you have to work with in the environment. And you're not going to get that if you're just going to look at it from the outside, because it's always as interpreted. It's always as seen by, as interpreted by. And we have these really interesting cases during the class. That's why being able to analyze certain kinds of interactions that the class afforded, for me, a great moment. There were actually a couple of them where there was a sequence in which where I made a suggestion like, well, one I remember clearly, and because the intervention was so marked that even I couldn't miss it. What was that I said, well, why don't we, there was a confusion about people speaking and time was going by. So I said, why don't we start with group number 1? And then that got it going. And then I intervened and said, nobody followed that up. I said, group number 2. And then I think Julian from one place, and then right away, Arturo. Basically, Kris had sort of let it go. There was something from Kris, and I said that. And Arturo immediately went against what I said and said, oh no, just let people feel when they want to feel like talking, talk. So what I was trying to do was to provide a little bit of scaffolding just to help us get through the groups in the time that we had, but it was interpreted as there was going to be keeping people from talking because you had already set up the order in a rigid way. At least that's how I then interpreted it afterward, because it happened twice. And then I just let it go, and everything was, of course, fine. Everybody got to say what they wanted. So they were right, but my intentions were good, right? People could have used that and done everything else. But it start with the diversity, and then we'll let the structure sort of grow out of it. And this is a constant, right? And you want to get Jay and the thing that he was talking about, how you want to get a good balance. But it's really hard because you have to do two balances. You've got to create a balance within the activity, right? Within the play world. And you have to create a balance between the play world and its environment that sustains it, or it's going to disappear as a practice. So I do think the chat and all the critical side, that methodologically and in values, there are good places of overlap that I think people should be able to hold on to as here. I don't know about law. There are heuristics here. There are heuristics in thinking about this, but I don't. What do you think, Auntie? Are there what are these principles of chat?
Yeah, I have been thinking about this, especially mentioning the paper that I am now trying to finalize about the ethics of trying to create compassionate cultures in education. And having been reading this post-colonial scholarship, it really has made me think why I'm doing this, why I'm going to, these urban settings with a lot of poor people, a lot of like second or maybe third generation immigrant people or first generation. And why do I want to kind of define this place? Am I going there to help? Am I, just feeling a bit better and going there? Am I doing it to promote my own career? So kind of when doing this intervention, I mean, if we have the empathy, we can use empathy. And also I would add compassion for good or bad. I mean, for bullying, we need also empathy. And manipulation. Do we need empathy to make them realize our goals, or is it like somehow something that we would be sacrificing some of our own to really do something for them that they want us to do for them? So this kind of relationship between the interventionist and those people there, I think this is an interesting dilemma.
Right. And there are a lot of ways to try to smooth things out. I've tried over and over again in my lifetime to do that. But I find that if I'm the initiator, then at a later time, I'm sort of the person who's left there. And so I've been struggling with this, creating a laboratory first at Rockefeller, then I came to UCSD, and UCSD washed it away, and then I had to recreate it like this, and then now I'm doing it like this. And it's like I'm really interested in fading from the scene. And one of the things, Auntie, and then we're going to have to give Ali a chance here, is that by going there in higher education, I'm not talking about the work that you're doing with early education, but by struggling to get marginalized people into the higher education system and getting them educated to worry about their own communities from their own point of view, we've created now a fourth generation. Having started this in the 1960s, we now have a fourth generation of people who are primarily people of color, who are a lot of the people in this class are being taught by people who came through a system, a coordinated system of both white and black and brown people in the United States to collaborate in order to create next generations of themselves who were not themselves, just believing that that's what the science of the thing needed. And that the evidence would show that you can do that, and it's been done, so that people like Kris and Naila and others are in very influential positions, and they can worry about themselves. And so I think that there is this potential generational effect through the education of teachers and others who don't do what you did, but that's not why you're doing it. You want them to do what you can't do, right? And trying to think about a better society. Now, you could be an anarchist and throw bombs, and that's kind of what Russia is doing in the United States now. And I assume the United States would do it back if they could, right? Disrupting the whole thing. And it's changing, right? Anyway, the links are really important. And so I think that's a great benefit of getting us to read post-colonial literature, right? So that you understand how whiteness is constructed and how it's recapitulated by people who are trying to get rid of it. So Ali, all of this we can come back to. I'll depend a little bit on you guys for the structure of how we come back. I don't know quite, and others, obviously we can listen to others as well. Ali, what you're interested in literature, right?
Yeah. So I'm kind of interested in the in trying to find what's like mutually interesting between ethnography and literature. Some of the, and particularly like the two authors that I have been sort of following are Laurence Sterne from the English Enlightenment and Rabelais from the French Renaissance. But I'm also sort of interested in using this method as a kind of a genealogy method or histories of mentality kind of method that, for example, Lucien Febvre and Foucault and all use to sort of think about how certain ideas have evolved over or come down over generations. So, for example, like the dichotomies between mind, body, and soul, and things like that were already being debated within Rabelais' texts and in Sterne's texts as well. And they belong to the tradition of learned wit, in which they use sort of novels to satirize the learning theories of the day. So, for example, Sterne used a lot of Sterne satirized the work of John Locke, for example, and things like that. So I'm also sort of want to see how like ethnography, like, or social interaction analysis, which is more like a horizontal, what I see which will be what I see, and sort of relating that to a sort of a genealogical kind of framework through novels.
Okay. Now you're at the University of Toronto.
Yeah.
And what's your course of study?
It's curriculum and pedagogy.
Curriculum.
So I also have to relate it to that. Yeah.
Okay. So my first advice, as I said, you and I, Ali and I exchanged a little bit of email, is that I know Ray McDermott is not well, but the literature rhizome, so-called, has really good people in it. So, and I'm extremely interested in that. I'm a part of that one, but it's from I've been able to teach about it in communication. It's hard to teach about it in psychology and stuff like that. But if you look at and maybe Auntie knows better, or Ivana, where everything is stashed, but there are a set of papers that have been discussed in the literature rhizome. You have Charles Underwood, who published a book on the Odyssey as its own approximal development, basically, and the problem of the immigrant, and a lot of the issues that are of concern in the post-colonial literature. He takes up an extremely interesting reading of the Odyssey. And the other person who's really interesting, and they've gotten together, but only in print. There, good. That's it. So there's a place to, right. And he has an article that's also, I think, in the depository, one of the depositories there, of his work on Pinocchio. So he has an analysis of Pinocchio as a model of development that is really good. It's a social analysis, but it's also a psychosocial analysis. It's a wonder to read the thing. He has these penetrating questions he asks, like, I won't even get into it. I won't spoil your fun of reading it because it's just so interesting. And then a number of us are interested in H.G. Wells. And H.G. Wells has a story that I've used a lot and others have used a lot, called The Country of the Blind, or In the Valley of the Blind, which I think is a fabulous utopian experiment. And that begins to hook up with Anna's work on, which I didn't give references to on imagination. So, and if you're, so Anna, I read that, I mean, you might, all these things overlap at some point, right? Eddie's stuff too has got imagination in it big time. So, But so I take a look at those, and I'm really hot for like taking also Kenneth Burke's article on literature as equipment for living. That article is really foundational because he really talks about literature, reading and writing literature as joint mediated activity. He doesn't use those terms, but that's how he does it. And he's a part of that tradition that you were asking about, Elena, that's called symbolic interactionism in sociology. So Kenneth Burke's work is often very difficult, but he touches on all these issues. And he has some great metaphors, like the metaphor of a cocktail party. Society as a metaphor. He uses a cocktail party where you have to read him doing it. But basically the idea is that it's like, think about New York in the 20s, and people go over to somebody's house, maybe it was Prohibition, and there'd be a illicit party going on, but you come into the party, and the party's always going on. And you come into the party in the evening, and you stand around and you start listening and see who's there and listen to what people are talking about. And then you join into the conversation, you get into a heated argument with somebody, then you get tired and you listen a little bit, and it's time to go home, right? And you leave the conversation. And that's just kind of there's always an ongoing conversation, and people come along and join in the conversation, and they move through it in cycles. And that's also extremely interesting in trying to think about, say, the internet now, or the memes floating around, or what people are reading. What do they pick up? What does it mean that what you're seeing has been tailored by your prior choices, so that people are playing on your prejudices to narrow your view over time for money, right? So that's actually, Burkean type things are actually visible, around you. So I would go there, and I think you can engage. We could have you could organize one of these like at other times, like if you could find a couple of the literature Rajon people and say here's, and Stern, McDermott's written, a lot on Stern. And then there's this tradition of using science fiction as a form of ethnography, right? As an imaginative ethnography. And communities that form around science fiction novels and try to create, or Comic-Con, fan communities. That's why you can see communication is a great place to use chat, because just mediated human activity. You can just go on and on. So I think that would be really useful. And this is a case where you coming in, if you've got the time and interest, which you do, you've got several interested people, but now you have to find a way to get them to structure what they're doing so it's useful for them, helpful for them, for themselves to respond to. Right, so asking questions like on Stern, reading what Ray has to say, and see if he's, if not, then if he can't do it, Luca Tatteo's in Italy. Try and get him into the conversation. Try and get me into the conversation. And then there are others, Jennifer Vadabancourt, Beth and the Playworld people, they like that. So there is this community of practice around some combination of critical theory, sociocultural theory, chat, and they have different venues where they're most effective and most legible, but they're all a part of some part of a worldview, different responses to it. So we've done an hour, but we can do a minute or two more to close up, or you may want to invite somebody else, or you may somebody create a little forum where people can take turns, just as long as it doesn't end up being me and Auntie talking to each other. When you do these forums and they get too large, then it turns out that that's another PDS finding, that with good intentions, the Regen Project started to do messages that were too general, and junior people or marginalized people to the chat discussion would have some sort of a comment, and then it wasn't Jay, but somebody, some white male, old white male, would write this much text, and then that was it. The first junior person just wouldn't come back into that arena, because what do I have to say to them? So you need to be very agentive in organizing the interactions so that they stay parallel. Everybody gets a turn. And of course, I've taken more time. But you all have, I mean, it's been a good start from my point.
Maybe can I follow up on this? Do you guys have any idea about how you would like to organize this coffee hour?
Yeah, I'm wondering if there will be any opportunities to give feedback on certain things. Even I know for other groups I've been a part of, like the virtual lab, like you're able to, folks are able to like workshop certain ideas and get feedback on papers. I don't know if that's a vision of this coffee hour, or if we just want to keep exploring certain concepts from the class and then we share resources. Or
I don't know. See, I just said that I'd spend an hour here, and as long as I know enough about it, so I'm interested in the topic, it's fine. And we share all these interests in the topic. So, I mean, I think that Elena, you wrote a memo, right? I think for Kris's class. Did you write a memo?
I haven't actually. Yeah.
Because there are a couple of people I've said, I'm getting a call from somebody. Oh, from Shirin Vasugi. I got to get off. Hold on. Hi, Shirin. I'm fine. I'm just now finishing up the class, and you're reminding me. We're just at the end. Can I call you back, or you can join, or I'll call you back in 5 minutes? Okay, good. Bye-bye. Made a date with Shirin for after this, and she's a hard woman to get a date time with. So, I mean, yeah, it's just a question of keeping it organized enough so it doesn't fragment to the point where people aren't interested, you know, or we have to rotate or get other people into doing it. Susan is, I mean, we don't, just Auntie and I, we were right before this had something to talk about, and so we were just here, but otherwise, it could be anybody here. I really wish that that Sandra had been here, because she could just pull up the rest of it. And I'll forward, I guess somebody other than Eddie should take it up, but I'm gonna get off and talk to Shirin. And if the one idea that we had was, which we would cut off just at an hour perhaps, would be to put this on Cultural Praxis. So anybody could watch it that wanted to. But if you don't, I mean, because nobody said anything embarrassing. It's been an interesting conversation. And it might be right? And it might be a model so other people could see you could have a decent conversation and not be afraid. It's up to you. I'm gonna get off. Yvonne is the one who knows how to organize all of that. And so I'm gonna leave, and I'll be back next week, God willing, as they say.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Learned a lot as always.
Thank
you so
you.
much.
Everybody.
Well, I guess everyone left.
Yeah. Did you have any question?
No, I'm good. I just thought that you were gonna like try to organize it. So
I wanted, but I guess everybody left. I'm gonna send a group email. What I wanted to say is that I'm gonna send a group email. Maybe you guys can write your ideas. Right?
That sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.